Hello, economics students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 14, Section 1, the evolution, function, and characteristics of money. So, we're going to get into talking a little bit about kind of the birth of money and some of the functionalities of that. But I first want to talk a little bit about this thing called the Federal Reserve because we're going to kind of expand upon that as we go through Chapter 14. So, what is the Federal Reserve? Well, it is a privately owned but publicly controlled bank of the United States. Just so you understand, it actually is independent of our federal government, despite the name federal that we have there in its name. But the idea is that the leaders of the Federal Reserve, the people who are the chairman, are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. In the past, we've had Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, who have all headed up the Fed. And what they do is they kind of help establish what is going to be the interest rate for borrowing money for banks, and in a way, they help with the flow of money in this country. But going before that, we got to talk about kind of where it all came to, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of where money kind of originated. And so we're going to talk about the barter economy, and that's what it really is. It's all about bartering, trading. It's a moneyless economy that depends on trade. Back in the day, people were trading different things. One of the first things that was ever traded was, yeah, a shell like you see here. Now, I'd have to say that probably doesn't look like the prototypical seashell, but it was. I mean, shells were something of a value, primarily for making jewelry and such. But needless to say, we still have a barter economy that exists in our country yet to this day. You may have two people that have skills or talents or items that they might trade with one another to avoid having to do things like pay taxes and such. So this barter economy is still out there. It's still alive and with us. There is also the commodity money. Commodity money is basically using um, other things as an alternative to like money that we know today, like an economic good or a commodity. What you see here is a hand of tobacco. And years ago, handed tobacco, which basically is several leaves of tobacco that have been put together and dried, that could be eventually used to make cigars or pipe tobacco or such. It had a huge value, especially when you talk about the uh, basically the colonial time here in the United States. Today, you can look at commodity market as agricultural products like anything like corn, soybeans, wheat, but you could also look at it in terms of like oil. Okay, those kind of things have a tradable value out there on the market, and hence having possession of that certainly is just as good as having cash. You can have fiat money, which is money by government to create. And so when we talk about like our coins and our paper currency that we have today, that's a great example of fiat currency. In the early part of American history, we use gold and silver deposits to back up our paper currency. We still use a certain amount of that. If you've ever heard of Fort Knox, which is in Kentucky, it's an army base, but it's also where our gold reserve is, that is protected by the military. And that helps shore up our American dollars by all means. We can talk about the specie as a type of desirable money because it is in limited supply. So when you talk about those gold coins that maybe the pirates are always going after, um, there aren't a ton of those that are out there. And so by having a limited supply of that, you push the value upwards. If we would find a huge, let's say, gold or silver reserve that's never been tapped into, that possibly could bring down the value. But needless to say, if we keep it in limited supply, you keep the value higher. Monetary unit is basically a standard unit of currency. When we look at our dollar, that is kind of a standard unit, and we kind of subdivide it out into like um, $1 bills, fives, tens, 20s, 50s, on the way up to $100 bills, and then the variety of coins that we have. Most people are very familiar with that standard, at least here in the United States. What characteristics must money have in order to be of value? Got to be portable. Okay, if money was really heavy to carry around, we probably wouldn't carry it. It's got to be durable, meaning it's got to take some punishment. So that's the reason why in this day and age, when we talk about our paper bills, they're not entirely made out of paper. They're a little bit of cloth, like cotton. So that way, if they get wet, like going through the washing machine, they don't fall apart. They got to be divisible. You got to break it down. And that's the reason why we have our coins and we have all sorts of denomination of paper currency. And it's got to be an unlimited supply. If we would print, unlimited supply of dollar bills and coins in our market here, the value of the dollar would plummet. And thus, it's going to take a lot more of those dollars to buy anything. So if we purposely make sure that there's only a certain amount out there in circulation, we keep the value higher. And that's one of the things that the Federal Reserve is entrusted to. So if you ever get a chance to go to, like, let's say Kansas City, where our closest Federal Reserve Bank is, they actually do sort money that comes in from banks that are basically borrowing money from the Fed. And what they do is they purposely go through and they pull out money that is getting kind of worn out. It's not as durable as it once was. They also look for counterfeit bills and such, just to make sure that our money supply is shored up. Three functions of money. It's a medium of exchange, meaning that it's accepted by all parties as payment. Most people know what a $10 bill is. It's a measure of value. For the most part, we've always kind of been around money, at least since the time we were little, and we kind of know what it means. And so it is a common measuring stick that most people are familiar with. It's also a store of value. It's a quality that allows purchasing power, and a lot of people do save it until they need it. So if I know that I want to buy something of that's a little higher in price, I'm going to want to hang on to that for a while. Okay, so what do these money supplies consist of? We're going to talk about the M1 and M2. M1 is the components of the money supply that closely matches money's role as a medium of exchange. And certainly that is something that, again, that's what we're kind of familiar with. You're probably not familiar with the term M1, but that's what it is. M2 it includes the components that are most closely conforming to money's role as a store of value. So if I save $100 bills, I could trade that in for like a Benjamin Franklin $100 bill. I know what that's going to be worth by all means. All right. Thank you very much.